right still. Phebe de Klerke, Dutch by birth, but a seeker by spirit. Her desire to connect and help people led her to a master's in psychology and over 20 years' work as a therapist. She continually explores ways to connect to herself and others through clinical and unconventional ways. She believes the world can be changed through love, and it is love that brought her from Amsterdam to Glade Spring, where she enjoys growing food to nurture the body, spending time in nature to cleanse the soul and mind, and the companionship of her wife, family, dogs, and new friends. Love also takes her back to the Netherlands, home and residence of her beloved daughter Rosa and her family of origin. We welcome Phebe.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Can you all hear me well? Great. As most of you know, I'm not from around here, and anyone who has ever moved to another part of the world knows that it takes time to find your place and home in a new place. I have learned that for me this happens especially through the people that I feel connected with. The UU absolutely helps me in the process of finding my home and place here in Southwest Virginia. So I'm very grateful to all of you for welcoming me the way you have. You may have expected me to talk about Dutch culture. You know, things like cheese and wooden shoes and tulips and red light districts. However, I decided to talk about something that unites us all, the human brain. More specifically, I want to talk to you about whole brain living and how this seems to be of vital importance for our well-being on a grander scale for the beautiful planet we find ourselves on. I have always been fascinated by the brain and its function. During my studies at the University of Amsterdam, I started out with studying neuropsychology for a year and neurology at the Faculty of Medicine for 6 months. During this period, I came to understand the immense complexity of the brain and how much time and dedication is needed to become an expert. I decided that I'd rather work with people than doing research or work in a hospital. So I continued my studies with a clinical psychology program. Over the years, however, I kept my interest in the subject of the brain. And recently, I read 2 most fascinating books that changed my view on the brain and the impact it can have on our lives. And I want to share one of them with you today. And I'm going to show you. It's this one. It's quite an elaborate book. It's quite thick. It's wonderful if you're interested. It's called The Master and His Emissary. In this book, the author states that both hemispheres of the brain show us 2 fundamentally different realities and modes of experiencing in the world, both of which are ultimately important in understanding and recognizing ourselves and the world we live in. In order for this to happen, though, these hemispheres have to work together. However, the author believes that the hemispheres are involved in a sort of a power struggle, and that this power struggle is mirrored back to us in our culture, the way we treat ourselves, others, and the world at large. He argues that through all the literature and research he looked at, it seems that both hemispheres working together in a balanced way is vitally important in our lives. But in an optimally functioning mind, the right hemisphere is sovereign over the left. To illustrate this, I want to tell a story from Nietzsche, on which the title of the book is based. There once was a wise and benevolent ruler, the master, who governed a vast and prosperous kingdom. The master entrusted one of his most loyal servants, the emissary, with the task of traveling to distant lands to carry out important missions and maintain order in the kingdom's farthest reaches. At first, the emissary faithfully carried out his duties, returning to the master with reports of his travels and his accomplishments. However, over time, the emissary began to see himself as more than just a servant. He became enamored with his own power and influence, believing that he could rule the kingdom better than the master himself. Driven by ambition and arrogance, the emissary started to assert his authority over the kingdom, disregarding the master's wisdom and guidance. And in doing so, he brought about chaos, division, and ultimately the decline of the once great kingdom. According to the author, Ian McGilchrist, the right hemisphere of our brain is the actual master, and the left hemisphere is the emissary, hence the title of this book. The title for my speech, Whole Brain Living, is based on the idea of how vital the implementation of both hemispheres in our life is. It took Ian McGilchrist 18 years to write his book, and that is how intricate and complex the subject of the brain and these two hemispheres is. So let me start by explaining some things about the brain, just to sort of get you to understand. So Leanne is going to flip, because we can't use the remote. So let's look at the brain. Our brain can be divided into three parts. There's the brainstem, which performs many automatic functions like breathing, heart rate, body temperature, digestion. Then there's the cerebellum. It discoordinates muscle movements, maintain posture and balance. And then there's the cerebrum, which is the largest part of our brain. And this part is in charge of our higher functions. So vision, speech, touch, reasoning, emotions, learning, and the fine control of movement. Can you put the other side? The cerebrum is divided into two parts, two hemispheres. And the left hemisphere, as you can see, is in charge of the right side of our body. And the right hemisphere is in charge of the left side of our body. They are both connected through the corpus callosum, which is right in the middle. And that is a nerve tract. That is the only way that these two are connected to one another. So this is important information. One of the most well-known ways through which information about the hemispheres was obtained is through split brain surgery. This is a technique that was developed by Roger Sperry in the 1950s and 60s in California to help patients with severe epilepsy. It basically is a surgical procedure that involves severing the two hemispheres by cutting through the corpus callosum. Findings through split brain surgery were such as, in some patients, the hemisphere would contradict each other's behavior. For example, a patient slapping his wife with his left hand and protecting her at the same time with his right. Another patient picking out clothes with one hand and hanging the other back, never being able to get dressed. In our visual field, if you look straight ahead, everything to the left of the midline is seen through the right hemisphere of your brain, and everything to the right is seen by the left hemisphere of your brain. If you show the right hemisphere an apple, it's capable of knowing that it is an apple, for example, pointing to a picture of an apple, but it's not capable of using speech in saying that it's an apple. So when the right hemisphere isn't working well, it cannot use speech. In another experiment, the right hemisphere was shown pictures of naked people, causing a change of behavior, embarrassed giggling by the patient. Split brain individuals were then asked to explain their behavior verbally, realizing that their body is laughing but unaware of the nude images. The left hemisphere will confabulate an excuse for their body's behavior. Like, I keep laughing because you ask funny questions, dog. In the same way, when the right hemisphere is damaged, people can fail to recognize parts on the left side of the body. A patient that did not recognize its own arm kept on telling that it belonged to his mother. Other ways of gathering information about the functioning of the hemispheres is research done on patients with a stroke or a hemorrhage, and techniques that temporarily anesthetize one of the hemisphere. Can you do the next? After right hemisphere damage, patients tend to not see the left part of the visual fields. As you can see in the picture, the patient could only draw the right side of the pictures. Moreover, patients with the left hemisphere inactivation, right hemisphere inactivation, they are not aware that they cannot draw the left side. So they're just not aware of the fact that this is happening. To illustrate this further, So this is a patient asked to draw a tree. When both hemispheres were activated, the left thing was drawn. The second one is where the left hemisphere was the only place that was working, so the right hemisphere was deactivated. You can see again that this is what the patient does. He can only show the right side of the tree. However, when the right hemisphere was activated and the left hemisphere was deactivated, the patient could draw a tree, but even better than the first one, more accurate. So these were just some examples of the earlier scientific results. Later studies showed a way more broader view of what was actually going on in the hemispheres. And to sum it up, what McGilchrist has found over the last 18 years that he's been doing this research. Can you flip the next? The left hemisphere is focused on analytical thinking, language processing, sequential processing, which means, for example, we know that we need to start the engine before we put the car in a gear. Goal-oriented behavior and detailed-oriented perception. The right hemisphere is focused on holistic perception. Through parallel processing, it is capable of grasping the overall context of a situation, perceiving patterns and understanding the interconnectedness of elements. The implicit understanding of language. So, as much as language is in the left side of the hemisphere, as in speech, the right side can actually understand meaning in language. So, for example, expressions like break a leg, or spill the beans, or under the weather is only understood by the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is lost. Spatial processing, including the perception of spatial relationships in three-dimensional space. Emotional processing, a very important one that I will absolutely come back to. So the right hemisphere is really the one that recognizes emotions, but also makes us feel emotions. Intuition and creativity, and integration of information. What it does, it helps bring together different elements and unite it into a meaningful whole. McGilchrist explains the fundamental difference between the hemispheres by talking about how animals have to solve the problem of how to eat without being eaten. They have to be able to focus on something that they can grab and get very quickly. For this, they need detailed, precise attention to a very small thing that they need to manipulate. But that's not the only attention they need. They need at the same time to have a broad, open, vigilant attention for predators who will make them its lunch. And more than that, it needs to be open to everything, to its mate, to its offspring, to everything that's going on in the world. The left hemisphere has evolved to be the one that helps us manipulate the world. And the right hemisphere is the one that helps us understand the world and make sense of it. He argues that our Western societies have put too much emphasis on the left hemisphere functions, which places a strong emphasis on analytical and reductionist approaches to understanding the world. This has led to a shift of societal values that prioritizes efficiency, productivity, and goal-oriented behavior. He states, and I quote, "As a society, we are becoming more like individuals with right hemisphere deficits. Evidence from the teaching profession suggests that between a quarter and a third of children aged as old as 5 to 7 are now having to be taught how to read the human face, something that until recently would have been necessary only in the case of children with autism. And about a third of all children now having difficulty carrying out tasks that a decade ago, virtually every child in a mainstream school would have been able to do easily, tasks that depend on sustained attention. Add to that the research suggesting that young people today are less empathetic than children 30 to 40 years ago." McGilchrist suggests that the dominance of left hemisphere modes of thinking has influenced various aspects of Western culture, and I'm just going to name a few that he gets into. He talks about fragmentation and reductionism. The left hemisphere tends to focus on detail, analysis, and breaking down complex phenomena into smaller parts. This emphasis has led to specialized fields and discipline that often operate in isolation from one another. The materialistic worldview in Western culture and the objectification of nature and human experience has led to viewing them as resources to be exploited rather than to be understood and appreciated. Technological advancements. While technological advancements have undoubtedly brought many benefits to society, McGilchrist suggests that the left hemisphere's dominance has led to an emphasis on efficiency, productivity, and technological progress at the expense of human values, relationships, and ecological sustainability. There is a loss of depth and meaning. The left hemisphere's analytical and linear mode of thinking tends to prioritize service-level understanding and immediate gratification over deeper, more contemplative forms of engagement with the world. This has contributed to a loss of depth, meaning in Western culture, where material wealth and external success are often equated with fulfillment and happiness. And the last thing he mentions is alienation and disconnection. The emphasis on individualism, competition, and rationality in Western society has contributed to a sense of alienation and disconnection from oneself, others, and the natural world. Overall, McGilchrist's analysis highlights the importance of recognizing and integrating the complementary strength of both hemispheres in the brain. The analytical precision of the left hemisphere and the holistic intuition of the right hemisphere to foster a more balanced and harmonious relationship with ourselves, others, and the world around us. He argues that in order for us to see the whole picture, information have to pass from the right to the left, back to the right hemisphere, to truly appear new once again. Comparing it to doing a puzzle, we first want to see the picture we are going to put together. Then we have to be able to see and recognize the individual pieces and how to put them together to build it into a whole picture. Once we put it all together, we see a whole new picture, more evolved and vivid than the one on front of the puzzle box that we started out with. So I know this was a long part of getting information out, and I hope I haven't bored you too much with this. But I just want to talk about some specific that I've learned and taken out of this discussion that I've just taken you through. We have at least 2 narrations going on at the same time, all of the time, and probably more. There's research that is showing that we have 4 to 6 to 8, how many narrations going on. So the other book that I was reading was actually more going into that, and I wanted to integrate it into my speech, but I just couldn't find the time because it was just too elaborate how I had to at least get you started and some information out here. Anger is in the left side of our brain. Since the left is narrowly focused on details and black and white thinking and very good at confabulating it, it means that when we are angry, we are basically incompetent to see the whole picture. And we tend to make up stories to be right. Of course, we know this all, but this was like emphasized by this for me. Another thing that came out for me is why so many people reporting, and like I notice this in my work all the time, they feel lonely and lost and deprived of any meaning. And I think reading this and getting more engaged into this, I think we can actually do something about this by, working with the entire brain, the whole brain. Another thing, how creativity and other activities that activate the right hemisphere encourages empathy, kindness, flexible reasoning, authentic communication, and foster deeper and meaningful relationships with others. All of these highly valued here at the UU. Another point was how actively stimulating our right brain may be the way to change the political debate that is going on, creating a divided nation. And I want to emphasize, not just here. I see it happening in the Netherlands too, and all over Europe. How reading this speech that I have written out aloud, like I have, may make it less authentic and in the moment. And therefore I'm creating less connection with you all. But my left brain really needed some reassurance and comfort. Furthermore, I want to mention this. I am well aware and want to emphasize that by making it into a discussion about the right and the left hemisphere, we ourselves are reduced into brains with no notice of our bodies or the rest of us. And by doing this, therefore, by definition, approaching this from a limited left brain point of view, we have to stay watchful that we never make a story, a theory, or a belief the absolute truth or explanation for anything. We as human beings have to accept and embrace our limitations. Meg Gilchrist, no, I'm just going to put it all together the way I wanted to put it all together. We have different personalities inside of us due to our two hemispheres. Both hemispheres play different but vital roles in our lives. They are both needed and should be valued for what they can and cannot do. But it's also important to see that there is a master, the right brain, that has an overview and can connect things together to see a bigger picture. And that is helped by the emissary, the left hemisphere, to gather the separate pieces together. We live in a society that has slowly let the emissary take over our functioning. And because of this, we as people and as a society are losing our vitality, our ability to connect with one another, and our open-mindedness. And therefore, we are failing to connect to a deeper spiritual meaning of our lives, and also lose the ability to care for one another and our natural surroundings. We urgently need to return to whole brain living by bringing our brains back into balance and engage in right brain activities, as reading poetry, engage in storytelling, be out in nature, meditate, do yoga, listen to music, make music, and most of all, dance every single day. Reading this book and writing this speech I'm sorry. What happened for me, why I think this book has also was so important for me, was that I've realized that I was thinking back, I think ever since I came here, but maybe even before that during COVID, I felt like I switched into a survival mode. I switched into pushing my feelings away, being less in contact with it, continuing my work, doing my things, but feeling less. And I've been trying to bring that back, and I am working on it, but I also notice that I have these moments where I can be overwhelmed by emotions all of a sudden, and I think it really has to do with my survival mode. And I think the survival mode is really in the left side of our brain. So I think the right side of our brain is just a part where you really feel all the emotions. And I'm, by pushing them away, by getting into a survival mode, that is how we survive. Anyway, I want to end this speech by telling you that reading this book and writing this speech made me realize even more how grateful I am to be part of a community like this here at the UUCH that stresses the importance of values like kindness, equity, and compassion. And how by engaging here, we are together, creating a better life and future for everyone here in this community, and perhaps the entire world.